Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
Everyone clapped like seals at a damn circus, grinning, cheering, raising their champagne flutes high in the air as if they'd just witnessed the second coming of Christ. But not a single pair of eyes was on me, even though I was the one standing there with a trembling note card in one hand and a toasting glass in the other, waiting to finish the sentence I'd barely started before my sister Lena, perfect, glowing, eternally adored Lena, decided that my engagement party was the ideal backdrop to drop her own little bombshell. We're pregnant. It wasn't just the timing, though that alone could have flattened a lesser woman. It was the way she did it, standing up right in the middle of my toast, like she'd just remembered something casual and adorable. One hand on her stomach, the other laced with her husband's. Her voice dipped in that sweet performative breathiness she used whenever she wanted everyone to think she was just so humbled by life's little miracles, as if her uterus had bestowed a blessing on the whole damn room. I stood there frozen, watching the shift like a slow-motion car crash. My mom gasped like she'd just won the lottery, clasping her hands together and whispering, "Oh, Lena," with tears welling in her eyes. My dad blinked, stood up to hug her. Even Tyler, my fiancé, God love his distracted, decent heart, clapped without thinking, then caught himself and looked over at me, one hand halfway in the air, unsure if he should be celebrating or comforting me. Spoiler, he did neither. Do you ever notice how people, even the ones you think love you, never quite know what to do when your moment turns into someone else's? They look around, wait for someone else to react first. And if the room tilts in a different direction, if the applause gets loud enough, they just go with it. I stood there with my toast half red, the room spinning into a chorus of congratulations that weren't meant for me. My name might as well have disappeared off the invitations. Here's a question I want you to sit with. What would you do if the person you'd always quietly supported, the one you forgave too many times to count, finally stole something you couldn't get back? Your once-in-a-lifetime moment? Would you let it go again? Or would you find a way to make them remember your name, even if it cost you the high road? I lowered my glass slowly, let the note card slide down to the table like it was nothing, like it didn't have hours of thought and vulnerability scribbled on it. And I sat down, smiling with my mouth, not my eyes. Lena caught my glance and gave me that little oops shrug she'd perfected since we were kids. Like she knew what she did, but also knew I wouldn't do a damn thing about it. And maybe she was right. At least in that moment. I didn't say a word the rest of the night. I let her be the glowing center of attention, let her circle the room like a damn queen, while I stood off to the side in my own dress, with my own ring, at my own party. Even Tyler, later in the car, tried to defend her. She probably didn't mean to overshadow anything, he said. Eyes on the road, one hand on mine, but barely gripping it. She was just excited. It's big news. Sure, big news. On my big night. That's the thing about sisters like Lena. They're not villains. They're worse. They're adored. They're enabled. They get away with it because people like me are told we're too sensitive, that we should be happy for them, that it's not a competition. When deep down, everyone knows it is. Life is a fucking scoreboard, and Lena just put another glowing ultrasound frame point on hers, right in the middle of mine. When I was 11 and she was 8, she broke my science fair project because hers was cuter. She didn't apologize. She pouted, and I got in trouble for yelling. When we were in high school, she wore my prom dress without asking, spilled red wine on it, and told Mom I'd offered it to her. Every time I swallowed the anger, told myself to be the bigger person. That was the phrase of my entire damn childhood. Be the bigger person. But how big do you have to be before you start disappearing altogether? I stared at the ceiling that night, Tyler snoring gently beside me, and I thought about every time I had let her walk over me with her glittery shoes and her innocent act. The resentment didn't come in one wave. It came like a drip from a leaky faucet, steadily, quietly, until you realize your whole damn floor's wet. That night was the last drop. I didn't scream, I didn't make a scene. I just made a promise to myself, silent and steady, like a whisper to the part of me that had finally had enough. She'd stolen my moment. I smiled, but I didn't forget. There's something uniquely suffocating about the kind of sibling rivalry that no one outside the family believes is real. The kind where you're told, over and over, that you're imagining it, that it's just sisterly love with a side of competition. That you should be thankful to have someone so close in age, someone to grow up with, someone who just wants to help, even when that help feels more like sabotage dressed in designer empathy. Lena was always the golden child, the one with the charming dimples and the knack for performing innocence so convincingly that even when she was caught with her hand in the metaphorical cookie jar, people would somehow end up apologizing to her for accusing her at all. I think it started small, like all resentments do, in moments so subtle they slip through the cracks of memory, unless you've trained yourself to collect them like evidence. I remember one afternoon in middle school when I spent an entire week building a diorama of the solar system. Papier-mâché planets, little wires suspended from coat hangers, the whole thing painted with obsessive precision. And the night before it was due, Lena accidentally knocked it off my desk while chasing our dog. I cried, furious and inconsolable, but Mom sat me down and told me, in that weary, condescending tone she reserved for any moment I dared express actual anger, that Lena didn't mean it, that she was just clumsy, and that if I redid it quickly, maybe I'd even do it better. That phrase, "she didn't mean it," became the family anthem every time Lena's careless behavior left someone else holding the emotional shards. Years passed, and the infractions became more refined. She borrowed clothes without asking, claimed my ideas as her own in college application essays, made jokes at my expense during family dinners that sounded harmless, until I saw the way people laughed and glanced at me afterward, unsure if I was in on it or just the butt of it. She was always the one who made the mess and somehow got handed a broom like it was a prize for creativity. So when she pulled that stunt at my engagement party, when she stood up and hijacked the attention with her baby announcement like, my life was just a minor subplot in her storybook, it didn't feel like the first betrayal. It felt like the latest in a long line of well-manicured middle fingers. And I was done pretending I didn't notice. We'd grown up, but our roles had stayed the same. Lena the adored, Lena the celebrated, Lena the one who could light up a room while sucking all the oxygen out of it. And me? I'd learned to keep my joy measured, my pride quiet, my anger tucked away in neat, self-contained boxes. Until now. In the weeks following the engagement party, I threw myself into planning the wedding with a kind of militant focus, determined to create something that was entirely mine, something she couldn't interrupt or overshadow. Tyler, to his credit, tried to be involved, though he had all the enthusiasm of a man handed a Pinterest board and asked to decipher it without instructions. He wanted me happy, but he didn't understand the battlefield I was walking into, how every decision, every vendor call, every menu choice felt like a trench I was digging between me and Lena's influence. She offered to help, of course. With her usual fake modesty and that smile that never quite reached her eyes, she said she had so many connections from planning her own wedding the year before that she'd be happy to share her spreadsheet, introduce me to her florist, even guide me on how to avoid typical bridal mistakes. It was said with sugar, but all I tasted was salt. I declined, politely at first, then with more directness, and she acted hurt, as if I'd slapped away a sincere hand instead of sidestepping a power play. Then came the second blow, subtler but deeper. I found out, through a group text I wasn't even part of, that Lena had booked her baby shower for the same weekend as my bridal shower, even going so far as to invite half the same relatives. She told Mom it was the only date that worked for everyone, and when I confronted her, she gave me that wide-eyed innocence, said she didn't realize it was the same weekend, and, of course, she'd move it if it was a big deal. But I knew the truth. She wasn't moving anything. She never did. That night I sat on the back porch, wine in hand, staring out at the soft glow of our yard lights. And I realized that this wasn't just about weddings or babies or showers. This was about erasure. About how, time after time, my milestones were treated like placeholders for her spotlight. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to know she was doing it. Or maybe she did, and that's what made it worse. Lena's birthday was coming up in 6 months, a Saturday, a date I'd never cared much about until now. And in that moment, as I sipped my wine and felt the resentment crystallizing into something sharp and deliberate, I made a decision. She'd never forget my name again. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to take something sacred to her, something she assumed was untouchable, and I was going to make it mine. Because some candles deserve to be blown out, and some sisters need to learn that the fire doesn't always belong to them. There's a moment, somewhere between pain and clarity, when the bitterness stops burning and starts calcifying into something colder, something more focused, something that doesn't scream or sob anymore, but simply breathes, watches, waits. That's where I found myself, sitting at my kitchen table with a fresh calendar spread out in front of me, not just planning a wedding, but calculating something far more personal, something with teeth. While the world saw me as a bride-to-be with color swatches and seating charts, I knew better. I wasn't planning a celebration. I was plotting a message. And I wanted to send it so clearly, so surgically, that Lena would never again mistake my silence for weakness. It started innocently enough, or at least it looked that way from the outside. Tyler and I had originally chosen a late summer date, the first weekend of September, something safe and neutral, not close to any family birthdays or anniversaries, something that would allow out-of-town relatives time to travel and would still let me avoid sweating through my gown like a nervous prom queen. But after the engagement party incident, after the baby shower date fiasco, that pleasant, polite timeline began to feel less like a plan and more like a concession. Why was I still accommodating everyone else? Why was I avoiding conflict when conflict had clearly never avoided me? Lena's birthday was in late June, June 24th to be exact, a Saturday this year, a perfect glittering Saturday, a date she'd always treated like a royal affair, complete with themed dinners, curated guest lists, and Instagram captions about another trip around the sun, accompanied by a filtered cocktail and her glowing face. It was, historically, the one day no one dared touch, the one day when the entire family calendar bowed to her preferences. And just like that, as I circled the date with a thick red pen, I knew what I was going to do. I didn't move the wedding for a better venue, or better weather, or even for a better price. I moved it because I wanted the date. I wanted to take the one day Lena considered sacred and wrap my own celebration around it so tightly that she'd feel it like a vice. I wanted her to understand what it felt like to have your joy swallowed, to have your moment consumed by someone else's news. I didn't want to scream at her, or confront her, or send a dramatic family group text. I wanted subtle devastation. I wanted the kind of revenge you can smile through while holding a bouquet. I called the venue first, casually asking if our date could be moved up. When the coordinator mentioned that June 24th was miraculously still available, despite being peak wedding season, I almost laughed. Of course it was. Lena wouldn't have dared plan anything around her own birthday. That was her time, her throne. And now it was going to be my aisle. It cost a little extra to rearrange the booking, and Tyler blinked when I brought it up, but I brushed it off with talk of better light for photos and travel ease for guests. He was distracted with work and happy to avoid the deeper planning tasks, so he nodded, kissed my forehead, and told me I was doing great. He didn't ask why I was suddenly so determined. He didn't see the strategy behind the smile. He didn't see the war I was quietly waging. The save the dates went out 3 weeks later. I held my breath with each one that dropped into a mailbox, waiting for the calls, the messages, the confusion. And they came, right on schedule. My aunt asked if it was a typo. My cousin texted, "Isn't that Lena's birthday?" My mother left a voicemail that started with a sigh and ended with a gentle, tired, "Maybe it would be nice to find a different weekend, honey, just so it doesn't cause unnecessary tension." But I didn't flinch. I sent back the same line to everyone. The venue was only available on this date. Everything else was booked. It was a lie so tidy and believable that even my mother didn't press further. And Lena, she didn't notice right away. That part almost annoyed me. I expected an immediate explosion, a furious call, something dramatic. But she was wrapped up in baby prep and nursery mood boards, probably assuming I wouldn't dare touch her sacred date. She didn't even bring it up until the family group chat started buzzing about hotel blocks and outfit choices and plus ones. And then, one quiet Thursday morning, my phone rang. I didn't even need to check the caller ID. I knew the tone before I picked up. The rapid breathing, the artificially calm voice shaking under the surface. The disbelief coated in venom. "You booked your wedding on my birthday?" she said, not quite a question, more a warning shot. "You knew, right? You knew." I took a long sip of my coffee, let the silence stretch just long enough to make her squirm, then answered with a sweetness that had just enough edge to make her wince. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. It was the only date the venue had. Isn't that just wild?" She didn't scream, not at first. She inhaled sharply, probably trying to find the right script, probably imagining how to spin this so she could be the victim, the misunderstood, the gracious sister wronged by the cold-hearted bride. But I knew her too well. Knew that behind her carefully constructed outrage was panic. Because this wasn't something she could undo. She couldn't move her birthday. She couldn't reschedule her importance. She had to share it, and that alone was a kind of punishment she'd never experienced before. "You did this on purpose," she finally hissed, all pretense gone. "Don't think I don't see through your fake innocence. You're pathetic. This is actually insane." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It came out low and dry, the kind of laugh you let out when the years of being talked over, stepped on, and dismissed finally explode into a single victorious moment. "Lena," I said, calm as glass, "next time you think about stealing my spotlight, remember, now your birthday is mine." And then I hung up. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like the smaller sister. I didn't feel like the one who had to bite her tongue or take the high road or explain why she was upset without sounding like the bad guy. I felt powerful. I felt seen. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing nice. There is a peculiar kind of satisfaction that comes not from raising your voice or slamming doors or crafting eloquent speeches about betrayal and injustice, but from sitting perfectly still while the ripple effect of your actions begins to crash against the carefully constructed shoreline of someone else's self-importance. And as June 24th approached, the date now permanently rebranded from Lena's birthday to my wedding day, I could feel that satisfaction curling beneath my skin like warm smoke, a steady, glowing ache that replaced the usual tightness in my chest whenever I thought about her. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of fittings, tastings, floral decisions, and last-minute guest list changes that should have left me frazzled and overwhelmed. But instead, I moved through it all with a strange, collected calm, like someone who had already fought the real battle and was simply waiting for the victory parade to begin. Tyler was mostly oblivious, sweet in his well-meaning detachment, asking about centerpiece colors 1 minute and checking the game scores the next. And though part of me wanted him to recognize the deeper game that was playing out beneath the surface of this event, another part of me was grateful for his innocence. He didn't know he was marrying a woman who had orchestrated a petty war disguised as a wedding. And honestly, maybe that was for the best. The family chatter had settled into a nervous hum by then, with some relatives dancing around the subject of the date like it was a landmine they might accidentally step on if they spoke too freely, while others, usually the ones who'd always secretly resented Lena's dramatic gravity, were more openly amused, sending sly winks and half-laughs my way during the rehearsal dinner. My mother had attempted peacekeeping with her usual blend of denial and passive guilt-tripping, cornering me in the kitchen one night to ask, with the weariness of someone who just wants to keep the photo albums looking nice, "Do you really want to make this day so complicated, sweetheart? Isn't there room for grace between sisters?" I had stared at her for a long moment, wondering if she even realized how many times she'd asked me to be gracious, while never once asking Lena to be mindful. How many wounds she'd glossed over with that same condescending tone. How many times she'd expected me to swallow my pride so the family wouldn't have to confront its favorite daughter's consistent, polished cruelty. It's not complicated, Mom, I'd said quietly, placing a wine glass back into the cabinet. It's just a wedding, mine. And then the day arrived. The weather was the kind of perfect you almost don't believe is real until you step outside and realize that the universe, for once, has decided not to mock your efforts. The sky was a soft, unbroken blue, the sun warm but not punishing, the breeze steady enough to keep the sweat at bay without knocking over the floral arches. The guests arrived in clusters, wearing their best summer linens and awkward smiles, clearly aware that this was not just any wedding. They were walking into something that had already been whispered about over group chats and side calls for weeks. Lena didn't show up at first. Her RSVP had been a terse attending without a +1, and though no one had dared ask her what that meant, the implication was clear. She would come, but on her terms. And if she chose to make a scene, well, then the fault would surely be mine. For putting her in that position, I didn't care. I had already won. The ceremony moved like a dream, slow, sun-drenched, tender in the way only moments of true commitment can be. And when I looked into Tyler's eyes, I felt, if only for that brief window of time, like I could let the war go. Maybe, I thought, maybe this could be the reset. Maybe Lena's silence was her concession. Maybe she understood. But then during the reception, sometime after the cake was cut and the band had launched into its second set of nostalgic hits, she arrived. Not early, not quietly, not in good faith. She walked in just as the father-daughter dance was winding down, in a sleek, jet-black dress that clung to her like a challenge, her hair done in an elaborate twist that screamed effort, her heels clicking with precision across the floor as conversations dimmed and heads turned in slow motion. She didn't bring a gift. She didn't bring a date. She brought a storm. She didn't approach me, didn't smile, didn't even glance in my direction as she made her way to a corner table, sat down with the calculated poise of someone who wanted to be noticed for not trying, and ordered a drink. Tyler raised his eyebrows, clearly caught off guard, and I saw the question form behind his polite expression. Why now? Why like this? He didn't ask it, but I saw it. For the rest of the night, Lena remained rooted in that chair, speaking to no one unless spoken to, her expression unreadable, her presence a silent scream that stretched over the entire event like a second ceiling. People avoided looking at her too long, unsure whether to treat her as a guest or an intrusion. And I danced harder than I ever had in my life, laughing louder than I felt, letting the music drown out the tension as best I could. But later, when the crowd had thinned and the lights dimmed, Tyler found me outside, barefoot in the grass, heels dangling from my fingers, my dress slightly stained with frosting and sweat, my shoulders heavier than I wanted to admit. He looked at me carefully, like he was trying to decide which version of me he was now married to. You did this for revenge, he said softly, not accusing, just observing. Didn't you? I could have lied. I could have spun some poetic excuse about timing, symbolism, seizing happiness no matter the cost. But instead, I met his gaze, held it, and answered the only way I knew how, with the truth I'd been avoiding even from myself. I did it so she'd remember me, I said, so she'd never think she could erase me again. He said nothing for a long time, just nodded once and walked back inside. And as I stood there alone, wind in my hair, cake still drying on my hands, the stars above me indifferent as ever, I wondered, not for the first time, if winning had actually felt like losing all along. In the weeks and months that followed what was supposed to be the most beautiful day of my life, a day framed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of heavily filtered photos that make everything seem more magical than it really was, I discovered that revenge, while temporarily intoxicating, leaves behind a bitter sediment that doesn't dissolve with time, but instead settles into the cracks of everyday life, waiting to be stirred up by the smallest tremor, a look, a silence, an unanswered message, or even just the mention of a name. The wedding had been beautiful, yes, and I had looked the part of the radiant bride, But beneath the veil and the careful smiles was a quiet reckoning that began to claw its way out the moment the guests went home, and the real weight of what I'd done began to tighten around me like an invisible noose. Tyler, to his credit, didn't bring it up again in the days that followed, not directly at least. He went through the motions, unpacking suitcases from the honeymoon, sending thank you notes to distant relatives, and avoiding any mention of Lena or what had happened on our wedding day with the kind of caution that only comes from a man who suspects that the truth he's avoiding might permanently shift the woman he just married into someone he doesn't recognize. I don't blame him. He didn't marry the woman who quietly changed her wedding date to make a point. He married the woman who smiled during the toast, kissed babies on the cheek, and danced like her whole heart was light. The difference between those women was razor thin, and the one who triumphed wasn't necessarily the better one, just the louder voice that day. Lena, meanwhile, disappeared. Not entirely, not in the way dramatic stories like to frame it, where someone vanishes into the mist and never speaks again. No, Lena vanished in a way that was somehow more powerful. She went quiet, deliberately, calculatingly quiet. The kind of silence that becomes deafening not because it's empty, but because it's so obviously full of meaning. She didn't reach out. She didn't send a passive-aggressive message. She didn't show up uninvited to anything. She just let her absence do the talking, and for the first time in our lives, I realized how effective her silence could be when she weaponized it. Our mother tried to broker peace, of course. She called me on a Thursday morning, her voice pitched with that combination of maternal exasperation and exhaustion that had become her trademark whenever her daughters refused to play nice. "You girls need to talk," she said, as if the solution to years of passive competition, manipulated affection, and masked cruelty could be unraveled over a cup of tea and a forced apology. I listened, nodding at all the right moments, but I knew better. Lena and I didn't need a conversation. We needed distance. We needed a border wall. We needed truth, and neither of us was capable of delivering it without tearing the other apart. But silence doesn't mean closure, and even as the months dragged on, her name continued to haunt every family gathering, every group message, every quiet pause where someone should have said something but didn't. At Thanksgiving, she was conspicuously absent, her chair empty at the table, her name not mentioned once, as if saying it might summon her like a ghost with unfinished business. I felt no joy in her absence, only a strange hollowness, like I had aimed a knife too well and now couldn't remember what I was trying to cut. And then, at Christmas, she came back. She arrived late as usual, making an entrance not with noise but with elegance, holding her newborn son in one arm and a small wrapped package in the other. The room shifted, unsure of whether to celebrate or tense up. But our mother, ever the peacemaker, greeted her with open arms and teary eyes, smoothing the fabric of her daughter's coat like she was trying to erase the previous 6 months with gentle affection. Lena didn't look at me, not even as I stood across the room beside Tyler, holding a glass of wine that tasted more like a question than a drink. It wasn't until after dinner, when the plates had been cleared and the tree lights twinkled faintly in the background, that she approached me. She said nothing at first, just handed me the package, her eyes guarded, her face unreadable. I took it, confused, and began to unwrap the paper slowly, feeling every heartbeat in my fingers, as the cardboard edge gave way to a small, leather-bound photo album. Inside were pictures of us, dozens of them, snapshots from childhood, high school, college, holidays, birthdays, the two of us in various stages of forced smiles and genuine moments, each one labeled with a tiny caption in her neat handwriting. But near the end, where our adult years should have continued, there was a page ripped out, cleanly, deliberately, with only a jagged edge remaining. No explanation, no accusation, just the absence. I looked up at her, and for the first time in a long while, we really saw each other, not as rivals, not as archetypes of the golden child and the forgotten one, but as women who had inherited the worst parts of each other and then used them as weapons. She didn't apologize, neither did I. We just stood there, two versions of the same pain, dressed in different lives. When she turned and walked away, her heels barely making a sound against the hardwood floor, I didn't stop her. That night, as I lay in bed beside Tyler, the album on my nightstand and the ripped page burning in my mind, I thought about all the times I'd tried to be the bigger person and how being bigger had only made me easier to overlook. I thought about the wedding, the toast, the look on her face when I said her birthday was mine now. I thought about the kind of revenge that doesn't feel like fire, but ice, slow, creeping, permanent. And as I drifted into sleep, one thought pulsed beneath everything else, louder than reason, stronger than regret. Every year, when my anniversary comes around, she'll remember what I did. And every year, on her birthday, she'll remember what she lost. Maybe that was the point, or maybe that was the mistake.